and I are friends from social media, right? Will, we met on Facebook,
Yes. Hmm.
and Will is currently a social worker, and he and I have a friendship around things like deconstruction and disability justice. Well, we're going to talk about your story a little bit, but first of all, would you tell us a little bit about your disability, the name of it, and how it impacts you?
I have a rare disability called Mobius syndrome. Mobius affects roughly, it's a rare disability, so it affects uh, the rough estimate, only a couple thousand people worldwide. So Mobius, for me, is different as a person. The general defects are I cannot make any facial expressions, so I don't have any control over my facial nerves. Can't smile, can't frown. It also affects my speech because I don't have full lip closure, so certain letters are hard for me to pronounce. It also affects my hearing, my eyesight, but it's different as a person. Some people have it born without certain limbs. Some people it's more severe, so it's kind of a wide range of how it affects people.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit of your story. I know you grew up in a Southern Baptist church. And what was it like growing up in the Southern Baptist church, not only from a faith perspective for you, but also, having a rare disability? How was that for you?
I think the best way to describe it looking back now is that I grew up in a silo. I grew up in a very protected space, rural community in South Carolina, where all I knew was the world around me. So that was going to church 3 times a week, going to church for revival, going to church for any youth event. Church was my whole world, so that affected my worldview in every single way possible. It was my lifeline. It was my escape from the outside world. Living with a stepdad who was an alcoholic. So when I said it was not everything, it was not everything.
Hmm. Will our paths, while I just met you actually today, our paths have crossed in the sense of the school that I went to is a school that you went to several years later. And you majored in youth ministry, and it seems as though your disability was seen by people and it caused people to not hire you. I wonder, can you talk about that just a little bit? And then it kind of maybe spiraled into bigger deconstruction, and I wonder if you could double click on that a little.
Yeah, I graduated from Columbia International University in 2004. When I was in high school, when it came time to picking a career, the one thing that impacted the most was my youth leader, who was very impactful in my life, and so I decided to be a youth pastor. And so I applied and got accepted, and Columbia is a really small school. I think the undergrad was about 500, so it's a very small space. So I knew my cohort, I had the same professors. It was a very tight knit community. When I graduated, well, let me back up. I've always had a love of culture. So in Bible college, I went on several mission trips. So when I graduated, I found out about this opportunity in Atlanta with this organization that does youth ministry cross culturally. They train youth pastors overseas. And to me, that was an absolute dream job because it took my love of Jesus and I love of culture and combined those two. Well, when I went into the interview, the first interview was pretty standard. But I didn't hear back for a while, and when I called them, the guy said to me, "We're not going to hire you because we don't think people can understand you."
Oh man.
And he said, "We think you would better. We think you would be better if you were in a church setting." And me being naive, and me being, these are obviously good Christian leaders that care about everything. I didn't think about it at the time. I'm like, okay, great. I'll go and do a youth, do an internship. And so I ended up going out to Colorado, and unfortunately that ended on kind of on the same lines. I got out there, and 3 months later they just ended the internship with really no defining reason as to why. So I moved back home to South Carolina, just really in a depressive state. And I don't think my deconstruction started then. I think I saw the cracks,
Mm,
but I don't think I knew enough to start understanding where those cracks are coming from.
yeah, yeah. It's when I hear you share that, I think I hear you kind of saying you didn't even maybe have a box for somebody saying something like that to you. Your heart was like, I want to be a youth minister. I want to go to another country. I want to love kids and love God, and there was just not even a box for people saying that they saw you as a disability rather than as the person. And I guess I just want to say I'm really I'm sorry. I'm sorry that that is part of your story.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important though to recognize that it's not unique either, right? Well, like your story is particular to you, but this is something common, I think, in spaces that are more monocultural spaces, right? Where we don't understand necessarily our biases or how inhospitable we can be to people who are different than us. Um, I wonder, maybe taking up the story from there, how did you decide or what went into your process then of shifting your vocation from the church to a more professional setting?
So I never actually ever got a job in the industry. So eventually I had the life in Afghanistan, so I had to put that on the back burner. And I ended up working as a housekeeper custodian at a retirement home for about 8 years. And then we moved, and I stayed kind of in that role at different places for another couple of years. And we just weren't making ends meet. I mean, it was just a struggle financially. But what made the shift to where I'm at now, we had several kids who were born with medical needs. And in 2014, my daughter was born. And right when she was born, we knew that we knew there was some stuff going on. And she ended up getting moved to ICU, and she came home with all these monitors and equipment we had to use, and it really changed our whole world. And a year later, she had her cleft palate repaired, and which is a very routine surgery because a cleft palate is one of the most common birth defects. And when I talked to her surgeon later, he's done hundreds, if not thousands, of these surgeries. And the way it happened, after surgery, she had some major complications where her oxygen level was just, it kept dropping. And so they ended up rushing her back into surgery, and she ended up being in ICU on a vent for a week. And it was really during that week where I knew, like, first of all, I knew the horror and tragedy of what we were dealing with as parents. But I'm like, this is what I need to be. Like, I need to be here with hurting people.
Mm,
And a couple of months later, I was meeting with a friend for dinner, and she said, Will, you need to do social work. Social work had never crossed my mind in like 30 plus years. Never. And I was driving home that night, and I told my wife, I said, I'm going into social work. I'm a
mm,
30-something-year-old guy, and, and I applied for grad school, got accepted, and continued down that road
Mm.
to where I'm
wow.
now a licensed clinical social worker in Michigan.
So then, obviously, you still have your disability.
Yeah.
What was How has that impacted you in getting a job in social work, and how has that been different than it was in the church?
Now I say this with complete honesty, and I know people are going to hear this and kind of dismiss it, but I say this with experience. I have never experienced in the quote unquote secular world what I've experienced inside the church. Like in every job I've had, my disability has never ever ever been an issue. It's never been an issue. Like people accept me for me, and people would ask questions, stuff like that, which I encourage. I don't mind at all. But it's never been an issue at all. I mean, I can't think of one time where my disability has been an issue with the job I've had.
Mm.
Uh, I mean, how does that? What? How do you make sense of that, Will? Um, how do you make sense of the difference?
I think for most people who are Christians, most people who are evangelical Christians, when you clarify, they are raised and they grow up inside this bubble where everything they see, they hear, and experience confirms who they are. So they're never faced with different opinions. And when it comes to disability, people don't know what to do. When we had our daughter, I don't remember anyone who really went with us through that whole journey. I mean, people just scattered.
Mm.
And I don't think evangelicals know how to embrace or sit in the uncomfortableness of life. I think that's part of it. I also think that the other issue is that when it comes to disability, we limit God to what He can do.
Hmm.
I a couple of years ago, we were attending a church here in town actually, and I th- I thought I was going to go with the youth group that advertised they needed someone to teach, and so I met with the pastor, and he said, I think you could better off doing the camera. I said, I think it was a job. I think it was a teaching volunteer position with the kids ministry, and he said, I think you could better off doing video camera, and I did that for a while until I realized this isn't who I am. And even when he said, because I've always wanted to share my story, but unfortunately, most churches have always been resistant to that. But he said, well, we could plan a time for you to speak, and then you will put the words on the screen so people can understand you. And it just there was no language for what works for you. So I think for most people they don't even realize there's an issue. It doesn't even phase them because it's not a world they have to interact with. They don't have to interact with the disability world.
Hmm. Yeah. So one of the things I hear you saying is that um, definitely in like the SBC world you grew up in, and the more maybe provincial Christian pockets, there's a lot of homogeneity and there's not much difference. And so when confronted with difference, there's kind of this incompatibility that's just sort of assumed. Like we don't
Yeah.
know how to integrate this.
I will say this though, when I was a teen, I did go around to different churches sharing my story. But looking back now, I think the issue with that was that I was kind of put on this pedestal of, oh, here's someone who has a disability as a Christian. I was never taught at all how to sit with a disability because growing up, evangelical, got, praise God and everything, right? So only in the past couple of years have I given myself permission to say, you know what, there's parts of this I don't like. Cause I never used a teen. I would share my story and say, well, if God came back and said, hey, I'll take disability away, um, would I let him? And I was like, yeah, I will because it's the way I trust God. That's the way I trust God. But if someone would ask me that now, of course I want clear streets. I mean, yeah, I would love to be understood by everybody. It doesn't change the fact that I don't dislike who I am, but yeah, I'd love to have clear streets. So I think there's this idea that we're supposed to we can't ask questions. We just have to give God the praise and everything. And so it, again, people don't know how to wrestle with different ideas.
Yeah, and something else about this too is I've seen this. Like we're happy to, in general, in these kinds of monolithic cultures, monocultures, the outliers or the people who are different can be put on a platform to share a testimony that is extraordinary, right?
Yes,
But they can never move into a recognized leadership position where they have influence and authority. They can never be ordinary.
oh my gosh, I've never thought of it that way. That's deep.
But
Yeah,
but
it
it's
makes complete sense.
but well, it's the same. I mean, my mind's going in a million directions here, but like difference is fetishized, right? So
Yeah,
during the colonial period, people from Africa we brought back into Europe or America and taken on tours, and people would, treat them as exotic figures. But that didn't, and so you maybe if you looked at their face, you would think, wow, look how much they appreciate this person. Look how much they honor this person. There's a distance there. There's an exoticness that they're sort of um, consuming how exotic they are, but
yeah,
there's never any acceptance or accommodation to them, or a welcome or a joining with them, so that who they are becomes part of who we are. And I hear that's maybe tracks with some of your story too.
yeah. It definitely does.
Mm, mm. So then, how does your faith journey tie into this? Because I know that you were raised in kind of a fundamentalist sort of conservative church. Um, and then you've referenced a couple times kind of moving through like a questioning of your faith or a deconstruction period. Could you share more about that?
Yeah. Well, I really think the wheels started to spin in grad school. My first class in grad school was on diversity, and it exposed me to so many different things I never knew before. For example, I never knew the police brutality existed. So I remember calling a friend and I said, "Does this happen?" She goes, "Yes, it happens." I'd never been exposed to that. And so um, during COVID was when I think I finally realized I couldn't be evangelical anymore. And just began to question everything from the doctrine of hell, the doctrine of sin. But I think the catalyst for me, the day that I realized that something was inherently wrong, was the murder of George Floyd. Because I saw Christians I knew who I grew up with respond in such a negative way to his death. I'm like, what is going on? And what I realized, what I put together the last couple of years, that what happens is that most evangelicals only see sin as an individualistic thing, my sin. But we can't understand the greater sin to society, like racism and homophobia and those things that really weigh into how people experience life. And I think that was when everything just came crashing down at once. As to
Yeah.
where I'm at now, it's a good question. I would say that if I would have been raised with theologians like James Cone and just now discovering Walter Brueggemann and liberation theology, those ideas, I don't know if there would have been a big deconstruction because those those ideologies really helped me understand how faith acts in the world. But I was raised in a box, and so as of right now, I would say that on most days I'm agnostic. It's one of those things where I don't want to let go of Jesus. Like I want my faith to be an important part in my life. And I'm not ready to say I want to be an atheist at all. But then Christy, I would struggle with how do I find that? How do I find the faith that isn't evangelical? How do I find the faith that will include my gay brother who in that time of crisis looked at me and said, I'm gonna pray for you. Like my friend literally, she sent me a text. She said, Will, I'll pray for you. But yet, according to an evangelical, she's not a Christian. And so how does all that play out? And so what does faith look like now? And I would say for me it's still very much a messy process.
Mm.
Yeah. I appreciate your honesty. Um, Sometimes in these settings, we feel like we need to wrap it up with a vintage bow. And I say vintage because it's like means it's in the past. Like I figured it out and now I can tell the happy clappy story. But the reality is like many of us and our listeners, there is an entanglement of questions and frustration and hurt and pain and that we have to dissect and untangle and be honest about. And so I appreciate you being honest about where you are. I wonder if we can hear from you about, like, in your opinion, the importance of, DEI in church and community. And I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. First of all, let's say what DEI is. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
say they're anti DEI. They don't even know what DEI is. DEI
Yeah.
is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's break that down a little bit. So diversity is bringing around people that aren't like us and accepting that's good. It's a good thing. And it is. Equity is really giving everyone the same uh, the same playing field to work with. So basically, it's it's giving other people a leg up, so they can succeed in life. And then inclusion is including people that aren't like us. And when it comes to the church, I'm not surprised that most evangelicals are anti-DEI because, for one, they don't understand what it is, but two, their worldview has no room for that. Like, even though scripture will say, it will describe different people in characters in all walks of life and culture, there's no room for what that looks like in evangelical spaces. But the most important thing is how does DEI affect me? Because I think we can talk in broad terms, but what does it look like personally? So for me personally, I am a clinical social worker. So what that means is I've done my master's program. I've done all the hours I needed to take my license exam. I took my license exam, was the national exam, and I passed it. So I'm now a full clinically licensed social worker. So let's say that I'm interviewing for a job and this job has multiple candidates. So let's say you got, Sally, Mark, and me. And so what DEI does is it helps the person say, well, it helps us recognize our biases because we all have biases. So it doesn't mean that you hire incompetent people. I hear that all the time. Well, if they were the right person for the job, they would hire than anyone. No, that's not true. Because think about this. If you have in your mind what a position and that person in that position needs to look like, and you hire three people, and that one of them is different, is a speech issue, and you hire them, people will say yes, but most of us wouldn't because it makes us feel uncomfortable. So when I interview for a position, I have to work twice as hard because to prove myself because And then when I get to the interview, and the job that because we all go through jobs we don't get, I had to ask myself a question: well, did they not hire me because they found someone better, or they not hire me because of my disability? And that's something I'll never know. But you look at inclusion in schools. You look at all these programs in schools that have that help kids out. You look at how you have you walk into a building and you have accessibility. Accessibility is DEI, 100%. So when your grandmother is going to the airport and needs a wheelchair, that's DEI. That's inclusion. It's including the things people need to be successful.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a common misconception that I appreciate you speaking to, which is um, the way DEI works is there's 3 qualified candidates who don't have a speech disability, and Will is a less qualified candidate with a speech disability, and Will gets the job instead of them.
Yeah,
Right? I mean, that's the common trope, right?
it is, and I think it's a big gross misunderstanding because obviously you want to hire the best person. So I think the bottom line is we limit what people can do. In our minds, we think we know what people can and can't do, and that's just not okay.
Mhm.
So when I think of removing DEI programs in schools, I don't know if you see this, but currently the administration is wanting schools to do DEI. That that saddens me to no end because I work with programs that have really supported parents in the IEP process, which is very confusing. Accommodations for kids in classrooms. So if you take away DEI, does it erode those supports that kids have in schools, like IEPs? Um, the administration says no, but once you go down that road, you make anything possible. Right now, a lot of kids are in some kids are pulled out in special classes to help them, but more kids are pushing into classes. So um, they're being more integrated. So overall we look at the importance of DEI, we think to be anti-DEI really in nine ways is in nine ways to be anti-Jesus. I don't know if you could be anti-DEI or be pro-Jesus. I just don't think the values line up.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think one of the hallmarks of Jesus's ministry um is sort of the um audacious diversity of the people who followed him, and how he included people that were excluded, and he sought equity among people who experienced systemic inequity. And
Now
so
let me go back to what to your point. One, DEI isn't it's not this political ideology for me, it's a lived experience.
yeah.
But let me tell you what it looks like where I work. So I work for a company that celebrates DEI, and it's amazing. I work with employers. I work with coworkers who are Muslim, Hindu. They look different than me. They come from different backgrounds. I love it. But one of the things that I was able to do is I reached out a while back to someone. I said, hey, what would it look like for me to come in and do like a training session on how do we work with people with disabilities when we meet with them, and they loved it. Like, and so I've been able to do that and kind of help people understand, what the medical knowledge, disability looks like in the social model. And it's just been great to be able to kind of help them recognize their own biases. So programs like that exist because the company I work for values DEI.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'll just say, like, anecdotally, and Christy, I don't know if you can speak to this as well. Like, I grew up going to a parochial school, so a religious Catholic school that was fairly small, fairly homogeneous. And then I went to a parochial high school that again was fairly small, fairly homogeneous. And my kids go to a giant public school system. My son's high school has 3,500 kids. My daughter's junior high has 700 kids. And I had a little bit of concern, right? Like, will they get lost in how big this place is, you know? And what I've noticed and what I've found is that one of the benefits of being in a large public school for my kids is that they are exposed to a lot of difference, a lot, and it's not all positive for them, right? So we have conversations at dinner where I have to gently and wisely navigate um, like pejorative comments about difference, you know. Um, but in general, it's extremely positive for them. Like, I think I was in my 20s before I met somebody who was Muslim or Hindi, you know? I was in my, I was in high school, outside of my high school before I met a gay person, only because I did theater, you know? And so there is, I think, a benefit to my kids for being in environments where people aren't all like them. Um, and I wonder, I don't know, some people see that as a threat, I think, right? I don't know.
You know what that makes me think of? Um, I not too long ago was out to coffee with a friend of mine who has graduated from high school. She was used to be in the youth group, but now she's graduated and um, she has some disabilities. And we were sitting at Starbucks, and this woman came in who was in a wheelchair, and she was like kind of sitting behind us. And she was, like, kind of really close to us and could kind of hear our entire conversation. Eventually turned around and was like, do you guys love God?" And so it sparked this conversation, and my friend who was sitting next to me right away said, "Yeah, we love God," and she said, "Tell me about your disability." And internally, I was like, no, 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 you don't ask that. You don't like, I don't think that that's appropriate."
Mm,
And yet it brought about this conversation because my friend said, "I wanna hear about your disability, but let me just tell you, I have some disabilities." And like, the first truth she told was a truth about herself, and she shared about hers, and it sparked this beautiful conversation that I sat there and was like, I think for me, there was this big kairos of, um like, I don't want to talk about something that would be different from somebody else. There's, like, safety in, what is the same sometimes in our society, and I was so challenged by these 2 women who were so free to talk about the differences in their bodies and in their minds and in their emotions, and I try to hide that stuff. And
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is we need each other to learn.
mm,
And I need to not think I need to hide things that are not the same about other people.
mm,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah.
mm,
You know, Christy, it's our relationships that change us. When I think back on the relationships I built with my LGBTQ plus friends, those are the relationships that destroyed any theological views I had on being anti-gay.
Mm,
Because what I believed and what I experienced were two different things. And if we can have those relationships with people that are different than we are, and most people, now it does have to be gentleness because sometimes people don't want to talk about the stuff they've gone through, and that's okay.
yeah,
But most people are open. So if you have that Muslim coworker, ask questions about this place. They like that. You know, say, hey, tell me
mhm,
about Ramadan, tell me about Eid, tell me about what your experience has been like.
yeah,
They will more than likely love to have that conversation with you because they're curious. If you come at it from a level of curiosity, most
yeah,
people are very open to those conversations. And I think once we do that, if we could do that more, it would change the way we view society. Living in Metro Detroit. we have a large air population. So um, every day I see women wearing hijabs. And so um, it doesn't faze me. And what I mean by that is it doesn't make me uncomfortable. But for someone who's raised in the South, it might make you feel threatened. That once you have this conversation with people, once you embrace the differences, it really does. It destroys all those narratives that we've been taught.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
like for me, I love sharing my story. I love telling people who I am, and
Mhm.
a lot of people don't ask, but I've always enjoyed sharing who I am because my life is always going to open doors. Like I'm really not like when it comes to being a private person. I'll share what I've experienced, and if it can help you out in some way, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you spending time today, Will, sharing your story
Yeah.
with us. I wonder if, as we close, if you could just tell us what you enjoy most about your job, doing social work. What brings you joy and fulfillment there?
Well, then I think ironically, when the organization went and hired me 20 years ago because they thought I couldn't speak. Right, I'm a therapist now, so I speak all the time, all day long, and so ironically enough, but and yeah, there's always that thought that if they can't understand you, but I think people can listen to say, hey, if you need to ask you to repeat something, repeat it, and it doesn't bother me. What I love most about social work, and what I do, is that I get to see on a daily basis people who are doing their very best to navigate the life they've been given, and they are resilient and they're beautiful people. And I tell them that you are a beautiful person. Your story matters. You matter because to the outside society, these are all the people that don't matter. And what I love most about therapy is that in therapy, the most important part is having that relationship with the client. And I always tell my clients, this is a safe space for you. This is a safe space for
Mm.
you to be who you are. And I love seeing people awaken for the first time in many years, discovering their true selves. Because so often we live our whole lives for different people. We never live our lives for ourselves. And one of the most harmful things about that we're taught in evangelical space is that you can't trust yourself. You absolutely can trust yourself.
Mm.
And like anything, there's a growing phase, but you can trust who you are. That's how you grow. So I love that I get to be with people who aren't always like me and learn from them
Yeah.
and grow with them. And the diversity is beautiful. But I love about social work. So one of our core values is upholding the dignity and worth of individuals. So that's my job every day is to help people uphold their dignity and say, you know what, you're going through so much right now, but you matter. You matter.
Yeah. Well, Will, this is our, I mean, we exchange voice messages regularly through social media, and I got to know you a little bit through that, and just reading how you show up on social media, the kinds of things you care about, and even today in this conversation, it's clear that you have a gift for helping people um, own and appropriate and internalize that they matter. And I just want to affirm that's how I see you show up in the world, and I get that from you too. So thanks for being you. Thanks for coming on to a podcast to share a little bit about your experience having a disability in the church and in the professional world. It's been great to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thanks.